Have you ever been in the middle of an argument and suddenly realized you were saying things you didn't even mean? Words that sounded perfectly logical in the moment, but felt completely irrational afterward. Maybe it happened with your spouse, your partner, a parent, a child, a colleague, or someone close to you. The conversation starts calmly. A disagreement, a misunderstanding, a small frustration. Then something shifts. Voices rise, defensiveness sets in, logic starts to fade. And before long, two intelligent people are behaving in ways they later regret. Why does this happen? Why can highly educated, emotionally mature people suddenly lose access to reason during conflict? And what if wearable technology could detect that moment before it happens? Today, we're exploring the fascinating neuroscience of conflict, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, real-time EEG monitoring, emotional regulation, and how future wearable technologies may help prevent arguments from turning into emotional disasters. Because the greatest threat to a relationship may not be conflict itself, it may be what happens inside the brain during conflict. Chad, your brain has two competing systems to understand conflict. We first have to understand the architecture of the brain. Imagine two powerful systems constantly interacting. The first is ancient, fast, emotional, protective, reactive. This is the limbic system. At its center sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala evolved to keep our ancestors alive. Its job is simple: detect threats, respond quickly, protect survival. The second system is newer, slower, logical, reflective, strategic. This is the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, the part responsible for judgment, impulse control, planning, empathy, decision-making, and self-awareness. In healthy situations, these systems work together, but during conflict, something remarkable can happen. The amygdala hijack psychologist Daniel Goleman popularized the term amygdala hijack. It describes what happens when emotional circuits temporarily overpower rational thinking. Imagine your partner says something critical, your child talks back, a colleague challenges you, a family member touches an old wound. The brain interprets the situation as a threat, not necessarily a physical threat, a social threat, an identity threat, a status threat, a relationship threat. The amygdala responds instantly. Heart rate increases, breathing changes, stress hormones surge, attention narrows, defensiveness rises, and suddenly the prefrontal cortex starts losing influence. Logic begins to go offline. The collapse of the thinking brain. Brain imaging studies show something fascinating. As emotional arousal increases, activity in regions associated with executive control often decreases. In simple terms, the more emotionally activated you become, the harder it becomes to think clearly. This is why people say, "I don't know what came over me. I wasn't thinking. I completely lost control." Because biologically speaking, they did, not entirely, but enough to change behavior dramatically. The brain shifted from problem-solving mode into survival mode. Jad that. What EEG can reveal. Now, let's talk about wearable neuroscience. EEG stands for electroencephalography. It measures the electrical activity generated by the brain. Traditionally, EEG required laboratory equipment, gel electrodes at clinical environments, specialized technicians, but new technologies are changing that. Dry sensor EEG wearables are becoming more portable, more comfortable, and more accessible. They can track changes in brain activity in real time, not thoughts, not private memories, but patterns of activation, attention, stress, cognitive load, emotional arousal, neural engagement, and potentially conflict escalation. Visualizing an argument. Imagine a future where both partners wear lightweight neural devices. An argument begins. The system detects rising physiological stress. Heart rate increases. Heart rate variability decreases. Breathing becomes shallow. EEG patterns suggest heightened emotional activation. The wearable sends a signal. Pause. Take a breath. Your stress response is escalating. Not because the device understands the argument, but because it understands the biology. For the first time, emotional escalation becomes visible. The invisible becomes measurable. The physiological threshold. One of the most important discoveries in relationship science comes from researchers such as John Gottman. He found that conflict often becomes destructive when physiological activation crosses a certain threshold. Above that threshold, listening decreases, empathy declines, defensiveness rises, memory becomes selective, problem-solving deteriorates. The body enters a state known as physiological flooding. When flooding occurs, productive communication becomes almost impossible. The nervous system is no longer focused on understanding. It is focused on protection. The biology of being right. Here's another fascinating aspect of conflict. When people argue, they often believe they are defending truth, but neuroscience suggests they may actually be defending identity. The brain can experience challenges to beliefs as threats. Studies have shown activation of threat networks when deeply held views are challenged. In other words, the brain sometimes treats disagreement like danger, which helps explain why people become so emotionally invested in being right, not necessarily because they are stubborn, but because their biology interprets the situation as a threat to the self. Hantad, the role of cortisol. Conflict doesn't only affect the brain, it affects the entire body. During heated arguments, cortisol rises, adrenaline increases, blood pressure climbs, inflammation may increase. Sleep quality suffers. Recovery declines. Repeated exposure to unresolved conflict can have serious health consequences, including cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression, immune dysfunction, and poor metabolic health. Relationship conflict is not just emotional, it is biological. The de-escalation protocol. So what happens when wearables detect escalation? The solution is surprisingly simple. Not easy, but simple. Step 1. Pause. The brain cannot regulate what it does not recognize. Awareness comes first. Step 2. Slow breathing. Longer exhalations help stimulate the vagus nerve and calm the nervous system. Step 3. Reduce physiological activation. Take a brief walk. Change environments. Drink water. Create space. Step 4. Return only when physiology normalizes, not when the argument feels urgent, because most conflicts are not solved by intensity. They are solved by regulation. Math. The future of neuro-relationship technology. Imagine future systems integrating EEG, heart rate variability, skin conductance, respiratory monitoring, stress biomarkers, artificial intelligence, not to replace communication, but to support it. A wearable may one day recognize your nervous system is entering fight or flight mode. Your emotional regulation is declining. Your cognitive flexibility is decreasing. Take 5 minutes before continuing. This could fundamentally change relationships, not by eliminating conflict, but by preventing escalation. The OXYZEN perspective. At OXYZEN, we believe some of the most important health signals are invisible. Stress, emotional resilience, recovery, relationship dynamics, neural regulation. Wearable technology is beginning to make these signals measurable. The goal isn't to monitor every emotion. The goal is to improve awareness, because awareness creates choice, and choice creates better outcomes for individuals, for families, and for relationships. Final thought. Perhaps the future of conflict resolution won't begin with psychology, or therapy, or communication techniques. Perhaps it will begin with biology, with understanding exactly when the brain transitions from logic to survival, from empathy to defense, from connection to conflict. Because most arguments are not won by proving someone wrong. They're resolved when two nervous systems become calm enough to understand each other again, and the future of neuroscience may help us get there, one brainwave at a time. I'm Dr. Yende, and this is OXYZEN Health Intelligence. And before I leave you with a question, if a wearable device could tell you that your brain was about to lose emotional control during an argument, would you trust it, or would you ignore the warning and continue the fight? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.